been in our series during the summertime, and we kind of, attached it to the summer and called it the Songs of Summer. And we did that because we're going to focus our attention on the book of Psalms, which is kind of like the song book, or you might even call it the hymn book for the Old Testament. And it was the most quoted book from the Old Testament in the New Testament. And so the music was very much a big part of their lives. The poetry, infused everything they were doing. And you think about it, Jesus is quoting from the Psalms, even on the cross. He's singing a psalm in his dying breath. And so you can see the importance of that. So we're going to spend some time this summer looking at the book of Psalms. And as we said, that the book of Psalms is also, perhaps by chapters at least, it's the longest book in the Bible. So if you're not in a current reading program, something you're doing consistently, join us and spend some time in the book of Psalms this summer. Well, last week, when we were looking at it, what we focused on was hard times. Because if one thing you figured out, if you've read the book of Psalms, is that it's brutally honest. It's raw and it's relevant. Doesn't pull punches. Doesn't give you some kind of, halcyon days kind of perspective of things. And these are not rose-colored glasses. This is how life really is. Sometimes you sing the blues. Sometimes, like the psalmists do in their writings, they talk about the hard times of life. They don't ignore it. They're not embarrassed by it. They don't push it under the rug and act like these things never happen to Christians or God's people. They deal with it because you have to deal with it. You live in the real world. And so sometimes you're going to sing the blues in the hard times. And last week when we looked at one of the purposes that God has in these hard times is that a mature faith comes through hard times, not without them. A mature faith comes through hard times, not without them. That you have to go through these hard times to mature your faith. It's something God is going to use in your life to grow you, to mature you. Because it's in those hard times that you're going to lean on Him the most. In those hard times, if you're following God, you're going to lean on Him more than anything else. And that this is true. In those hard times, if you're, following God, you're praying like never before. Lord, change the diagnosis. Lord, let not that check bounce. Lord, don't let him marry her. You're just, whatever's on your radar, you're praying like never before. Because it's a hard time. And so that's what we talked about last week. And this week, we're going to be looking back at David, King David, because he wrote almost half of the Psalms. And that's quite a lot. There's 150 of these. And David lived these 70. So basically, we got like one psalm for every year of his life. So we get this running narrative of David's life, in the Old Testament, and we get the music to go with it. It's kind of like a soundtrack. We get like a soundtrack to David's life. We get the narrative, we get the stories, we get, the details. We get the story, and then we get the music to go with it. It's kind of like a soundtrack. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, what are the most popular soundtracks? Because I was just kind of thinking along those lines. And here's what they are. The most popular soundtracks of all time. The Bodyguard. Anybody recognize that movie? You recognize that? The Bodyguard is way up there, okay? Another one. Forrest Gump. Anybody recognize that one? Yeah, you might even remember some of the music from that. Because I think that relied a lot on the music to, push the story along. The Lion King was way up there. You might remember that. That's actually an animated one, so that's kind of unique. And there's other ones like The Sound of Music. You might remember The Sound of Music? Yeah, and so these soundtracks, connect with us. We get it. We get it that you tell a story and that you infuse the story with music, and that makes sense to us. In fact, we can't think of it out any other way. Anybody seen the movie Jaws, right? Can you imagine the movie Jaws if they didn't have that running, what is it, like a bass or something like that? Can you imagine that movie without that? I mean, you just hear that music, and you get kind of excited. You kind of know something bad's about to happen. Where's that shark? It's just that kind of thing. You can't imagine the movie without it. And so we're used to that. And so when we read David and get all his music, it kind of makes sense to us. Well, David is going to do something unique in the psalm we're going to look at today. He's going to do something unique because not only is he going to deal with his problems, his struggles, but he wants to learn from them. He wants to be wiser because of them. So he's going to approach them differently. So not only is he going to deal with it and ask God for help, but he wants to learn from his troubled times. And so that's where we're going to be focusing today. Wisdom from hard times. Wisdom from hard times. That's where our focus is going to be today. That's where we're going to kind of sit with David through one of his songs and see where we can be taught. Wisdom from hard times. Say it with me. Wisdom from hard times. One more time. Wisdom from hard times. So if you're talking to somebody later on and they ask you about church today, you can say, if you don't remember anything else, you might get that. We talked about wisdom from hard times. And then that just kind of, fill the answer. Wisdom from hard times. The psalm we're going to look at is 39. Psalm 39. If you have your Bibles or want to put it up on a screen in some way. Psalm 39. Now, this psalm is unique in a couple of different ways. First, I kind of clued you in on the fact that David wants to learn from his struggles. He wants to get a different perspective on things. He wants to, be wiser coming out of these hard times. And you may already know this. There are some lessons you're not going to learn unless you go through hard times. There's some lessons you're not going to learn unless you go through hard times. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm glad you asked. What I mean by that is unless you go through a hard time financially, you're probably not going to value your finances in the same way. $1 means more when you've had to stretch it, when you had to pinch pennies, when you didn't know how you were going to make that payment or who was going to give you a call for a collection. You learn from it. Your health may not mean the same thing until you go through a hard time and all of a sudden you're not as healthy anymore and you can't do the things like you used to. But then you come to appreciate it. There's some lessons you only learn through hard times. And that's what David's doing. And he starts off and says, I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I'll put a muzzle on my mouth. As long as the wicked are in my presence. But when I was silent and still, not even saying anything good, my anguish increased. My heart grew hot within me. And as I meditated, the fire burned. And then I spoke with my tongue. So he starts off right from the beginning, going I don't know if I should say any of this. He's kind of holding back. He's hesitant. He's not really sure if he should proceed. So he holds his tongue, and then finally he says, look, I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. So he just continues the song. But it's interesting that he starts off with so much hesitance, and then he gets to it. And he gets caught up in an idea. And you'll see this, he brings it out in several different parts of the song and in different ways, but he's caught up in an idea that he wants to learn from. Numbering our days. The brevity of life. This is weighing on his mind. He's just caught up in it. And his mind just keeps rolling over it. And you can see by the words he uses, he just can't get away from it. Life is so short. And he just can't get away from this idea. So even though he's dealing with, these other issues, his mind is running, 100 miles a minute. You ever been to that place? You ever, be dealing with something and you got a problem and it may be bad, but your thinking about it makes it even worse because you just can't stop thinking about it. And you just roll it over and over and over and again, and it's a problem. Something you got to deal with. There's something there. But you're thinking about it, you just can't get away from it. David's got this idea, and he can't get away from it. But it's a good one, because he wants to learn in the midst of this struggle. And he wants to understand this. Numbering our days, the brevity of life. And this is how he goes about it. And this is verse 4. Show me, O Lord, my life's end, and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life. So he talks about numbering his days. Talks about life being fleeting. It's getting away from him. It says, you made my days a mere handbreadth. His days are a mere handbreadth. That's not something we hear so much. It's basically like the length of a hand. He's basically saying, it's only this big. Your whole life. It's like the dash on the tombstone, Born 1930, died 1955 or whatever. It's just that dash on the tombstone. That's your life. He says it's a handbreadth. It's only that big. All your days are just that. So brief. So you can't get away from it. He said, the span of my years is as nothing before you. Each man's life is but a breath. It's just, that's it. You breathe in, you breathe out, and it's gone. Your whole life. See, you can't get away from it. He says, man is a mere phantom as he goes to and fro. Verse 6. And some translators choose shadow, I think, here. So I'll put that as well. It's just a shadow. Your whole life, you think it's so vibrant and concrete and material. And he says, your life is just a shadow. You're just partially here. We see you, but you've got like 1 foot in eternity. It's going to be gone. Your whole life is just going to be, it's a breath. See how this idea just keeps rolling over his head again and again? He's got all these different ideas thrown out there, these symbols for life. It's a shadow. You're like a phantom. And you know that. You've probably been stuck by it, especially if it's somebody maybe you lived with or very, very close to, and it seems like they were in your life every day. And then all of a sudden, they're not. And that separation is just a weird place to live for a while, to get used to it, because they're like a phantom. They were just there and then they're not. And that adjustment, the grief is what makes that separation so hard, because you were there, and then they're not. He's like, that's the brevity of life. See, he can't get away from it. And he goes back and forth, and then he talks about, in these next verses, how, he says, your life is so short, and you worry about wealth. And he says, whatever you accumulate is going to somebody else anyways. I mean, think about that. Everything you accrued in your life, everything you put in your house, every vehicle, everything else, after you die, it's going to somebody else. You're buying it for somebody else. So he's stuck on that. And then he goes on the end of verse 11. He says, each man is but a breath. See, he goes back to it. And then he says, hear my prayer, O Lord. Listen to my cry for help. Be not deaf to my weeping, for I dwell with you as an alien, a stranger, as were all my fathers. He says, instead of alien or stranger, they use the term sojourner. And the idea there life puts you just as a temporary guest. You're just passing through. You're just a temporary guest in this life. See how much of this song depends on this? He's caught up in it. And he wants to learn from it. Lord, teach me to number my days. Now, one of the unique things about this psalm, especially for David, is that by the time this ends, it doesn't resolve itself. If you've read the Psalms enough, you figured out that even though they may deal with some dark times, some tough times, some anguish, by the time you get towards the end, things start to resolve themselves. The man is back to praising God. The man sees things clearly and has lifted his head. It's resolved itself. He's dealt with the hard times, but he's got a new perspective. God has, delivered him. Not here. Psalm 39 doesn't do that. It's quite unique. Psalm 39, it doesn't deliver. You don't see the deliverance at the end of the song. It just ends with David in anguish. You say, well, that's kind of depressing. Well, it teaches us something. Like I said, the Bible is raw and relevant and real. Sometimes you'll write a song and you'll spend your whole day trying to get out of the struggle, dealing with whatever it is, and some days the sun goes down and you're still stuck in it. If you were writing a song that day, it didn't change. The sun went down and you're still stuck. You're still dealing with that health issue. And you can't have peace about it. You can't have the strength that you need yet. You're dealing with that relationship issue, and it's not worked out. And you're still troubled by it. You're dealing with that job issue. You're dealing with that marital issue. You're dealing with grief. Whatever it may be. You're dealing with this stuff, and the sun goes down on that day, and despite all your effort, nothing's changed. You still feel helpless. You still feel, just caught up in it and overwhelmed. See, the language of the Bible is very relevant and real. Because sometimes you'll get that way. You'll go all day long waiting to make that turn, to turn that corner, and get to the part where God has kind of lifted the burden. And maybe you go all day and you don't see the burden lifted. Maybe it's going to happen another day. David goes all the way through it. That burden's not lifted. He's still troubled. But we want to understand this. We want to gain wisdom from the hard times. And here's what we know. Numbering our days. Numbering our days. When we have a heart of wisdom when we number our days, it makes us prompt. When we know we have an appointment in eternity, when we know our days literally, not figuratively, literally are numbered, it makes us prompt. That's what wisdom tells us to do. Because now there's a sense of urgency. Now I can't put it off. When I realize that I don't have, all this extended amount of time, when I realize the numbering of my days, it makes us prompt. There's now urgency in what I do. There's no urgency in what I do. If, and I'm not saying a doctor, I'm saying beyond that, I'm saying if God gave you, in a very real sense, the message that you've got 50 to 100 days left. That's all you have. And he's going to call you home. There's a whole lot of things you get real prompt about. There's a whole lot of things. If you really knew that deep down, and God himself had put that on your heart, you got that certainty to it, you'd get prompt about a whole lot of things that you had been putting off, that you were going to do later. Because numbering our days makes us prompt. And prioritize. Numbering our days makes us prompt and prioritize. When you know you've only got so much time, and you really do, I've only got so much time. You've only got so much time. So you better be prompt about things, and you better be prompt about the right things. There's certain things that you need to be prompt about, and you need to prioritize things. You need to prioritize things. There are certain things that aren't going to matter as much if you're not seeing the number of your days. But when you do, think about how important those marital issues are now. Think about how important those relationships, those family issues are now. Think about how important the other issues in your life are now. You prioritize. You've got time. You'll make time. Things you didn't make time for before. You're a busy person. That's how life is. But guess what? When you've numbered your days and you really see eternity, you prioritize. Things look different. Your priorities shift. Let me tell you an example where these intersect. I heard from a guy talking about it. And he was talking about his father. And his father's 76 years old. The average male lifespan in the United States right now is 78. That's just running average. 78 years. And his father is 76. And he sees his father about once a month. And he started thinking about these things and putting them together. And he thought, you know what? If that's the case, I only see my dad once a month. And he's probably not going to, there's no reason to think he'll go beyond the average. It's the average for a reason. He's got 2 years. He's got 24 times more to see his dad. Once a month. 24 more times in his whole entire life to see his dad. And that made him change. Because every time he visits his dad, it's just like counting down. You don't know, do you? You just don't know. But he's saying, look, I'm just thinking of, this very rationally, logically, if I've got just maybe 24 more times, I need to prioritize those visits. I want to see my dad more than 24 more times in my entire life. This is going to make him prompt. He's going to make the change. He's not going to put that off because you've only got so much time. And so now he's increased his visits to his father. He's increased the phone calls. He's thinking about it, and because he's numbered the days. And he realizes, not only in his own life personally, but he's numbered the days in his relationships. And he knows there's only so many left in this life. When we're wise, we number our days. It makes us prompt and prioritize. Numbering our days makes us prompt and prioritize. That's what wisdom does. Say that with me. Numbering our days makes us prompt and prioritize. One more time. Numbering our days makes us prompt and prioritize. This is what wisdom says. This is what David wanted to get out of this struggle. It's what he wanted to hear from God. It's what he wanted to learn. He wanted to be taught. We need to be taught that numbering our days makes us prompt and prioritize. So, as the music plays, what do you need to be prompt about? What do you need to prioritize? If you've numbered your days, if you really understand the brevity of life, how it's just like a shadow, it's fleeting, it's just a breath, it's just a vapor. If it's really true, if you really got it, what do you need to be prompt about that you've been putting off? What do you need to have an urgency about that you've been putting off? What do you need to prioritize? What do you need to move to the top of the list? And I'll say this as well. You've only got so many more opportunities to point people to Jesus. You've only got so many more. The people you come in contact with, you know their circle of friends a lot of times, and you know you may be the only Christian in the bunch that will be pointing them to Jesus. How many more times you really got to do that? How much more are you going to put that off? For wise, numbering our days makes us prompt and prioritize.